or afternoon or evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to this first track of the IoT M2M Council's Conference on Industrial IoT, brought to you by the IMC and Core, Locent, Pelion, Telit, and Multitech. That's quite a lineup of sponsors we got, and we'd like to thank them first and foremost. I'm Keith Kreischer, the Executive Director of the IMC, and the topic for this track is low power wide area networks. Thanks to everybody who is attending today and those who are speaking. We hope everyone is keeping safe and well. Before we begin, we wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen are multiple application widgets that you can use. All the widgets are resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to get the most out of your desktop space. You can expand your slide area or maximize it to the full screen by clicking on the arrows, those little arrows in a box in the top right corner of any interface. The webcast is being streamed through your computer, so there's no dial-in number. For the best audio quality, please make sure your computer speakers or headset are turned on and the volume is up so you can hear the presenter. If your slides are delayed, pushing F5 on your keyboard will refresh the page. You can find additional answers to some common technical issues located in the Help widget at the bottom of your screen. An on-demand version of this webcast will be available later today and can be accessed using the same audience link sent to you earlier. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can submit them through the Q&A widget. The presenters may answer the questions at the end of each session, but please feel free to ask questions at any time during the presentations. Any unanswered questions will be responded to offline. Now I'd like to turn this track over to Arnold Reich, who is an SVP at Deutsche Messe, of course, the organizer of Hannover Messe, the world's largest manufacturing event. Arno's given us some opening remarks about the Messe. They'll be doing their own online event next week. That's the 12th to 16th of April, daily from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. And we encourage any and all to attend. That's 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. Central European time, of course. IMC conference sessions this week are essentially the conference content we would have presented at the Messe Live this year. We're presenting it online, and of course we'll expect to see everybody live in Hanover in 2022, of course. Arno will not be taking Q&A, but we do encourage you to submit questions, and he will answer those offline after the session. And so with that, I turn this presentation over to Arno Reich and David Hall. Please take us away.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear Keith, I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to say a few words to you today. Thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Arnold Reich, and I am with Deutsche Messe AG in Hanover, Germany, and responsible for all our worldwide trade show events on the topics of industry, energy, and logistics. Of course, you are familiar with our flagship event, Hannover Messe, the world's most important industrial trade fair, which traditionally always take place in Hanover in April. However, as you all know, nothing has been normal for over 1 year now, and trade fairs cannot take place, or can only take place to a very limited extent due to the pandemic situation. This is now also affecting Hannover Messe for the second time. The show will be held from the 12th to the 16th April as a digital edition. The first time purely digital. Unfortunately, this also means that there will be no opportunity to meet face-to-face. And that's a particular pity, because this year, of all years, we can celebrate what is actually a wonderful birthday at the trade fair, namely the 10th birthday of the term Industry 4.0. Exactly 10 years ago, the term Industry 4.0 was used publicly for the first time at the Hannover Messe, among others by Professor Zülke and Walster, for example. Who would have thought back then that the term itself would find worldwide use? And of course you know this even better than I do, regardless of the term Industry 4.0, IoT or whatever, the idea behind it still seemed very far away and utopian at that time. How rapidly and extensively things have developed from that point onwards can be well observed in the course of Hannover Messe. After all, a trade fair is always a reflection of the participating sectors. And Hannover Messe, as a cross-sector industrial trade fair, reflects precisely this interplay between the different industries. Some subsectors, such as industrial automation, have always spearheaded technological innovation and further development. However, 10 years ago, the topic of digitization in industry was still something that was seen purely as an addition. Accordingly, at that time, a number of software companies presented themselves in the digital factory subsection in a small hall of around 4,000 square meters. For companies that had been participating for many years at Hannover Messe, these were sometimes seen as exotic, even as off-topic. In the years that followed, more and more digital groups came to Hannover Messe, including the industry giants. I still remember very clearly at first it didn't look at all like peaceful coexistence or even cooperation. In fact, we had some very emotional discussions, also in the exhibitors' committees, about which topics and thus also companies belonged at an industrial fair and which did not. People saw and feared new competition. And today, it has become apparent that the digital corporations and the classic industrial companies compete only in the fewest cases, but rather they have formed countless wonderful cooperations and partnerships that has driven great innovations. The speed and the scale of networking and digitization has multiplied as a result of these partnerships. Accordingly, it is impossible to imagine an industrial trade fair like Hannover Messe today without these topics. And just how important they are is shown by the fact that in 2019, around 30,000 square meters were occupied by suppliers of digital solutions, including global players such as Microsoft, Cisco, or Amazon Web Service. The initial skepticism has given way to a discussion how these synergies can be used even better and presented in a more optimized manner. After all, they affected all areas of industrial production, supply chains, but also energy supply and logistics as a whole. All these facets will be addressed by Hannover Messe and presented in context. Industry 4.0, IoT, indeed digitization as a whole, are still unbroken the top themes at the show. In particular, subsectors such as digital twin, cloud infrastructure, or especially AI and machine learning. But also topics like sustainability and carbon-free production are a big topic for the industry. And the corona pandemic has also put the importance of supply chain in a whole new light. Logistics 4.0 is a key topic in production and the entire supply network. Another new topic is currently being added, 5G. For industry in particular, the new mobile communication standards offered completely new application possibilities in production or logistics. But of course also in areas such as autonomous driving, whether for passenger or freight transport and logistics. Deutsche Messe has actively supported the new standard from the very beginning. We are currently the first European trade fair to equip our grounds with a corresponding campus network, that new applications can be demonstrated in a 5G real-time environment in the future. All these topics will also feature in the digital edition of Hannover Messe, which will be launched in a week's time. The main offering topics and thus content will of course remain unchanged. Automation, motion and drives, digital ecosystems, engineered parts and solutions, research and development, energy solutions, the topic startups, foreign trade, and many, many more. So how will the digital edition exactly be set up? The central content of a trade fair is and remains, of course, the exhibitor's products and innovations. As usual, thousands of product innovations and solutions from the more than 1,500 participating exhibitors can be found in the exhibitor and product search. The offer was supplemented, on the one hand, by a mediathek, in which the products and the enterprises are represented in video formats. During the week of the trade show, in addition to the 3 channels of the supporting program, there will be also a live streaming of the exhibitors, with the opportunity to ask questions live and interact with the exhibitors. For this purpose, we will be using a new matching tool called business dating. Here, as a participant, you can not only get into direct contact with exhibitors, visitors can, of course, also use it to get in touch with each other directly. Since each participant has his or her own profile, it is possible to search for the right interest groups and discussion partners in a targeted manner. All these new functions of a purely digital trade fair. So do they now make a physical trade show unnecessary? I say definitely not. If all the talks last year showed me one thing, it's that there is no substitute for a face-to-face meeting, especially in the technical environment of capital goods. So there will still be trade fairs, and hopefully we will meet again in Hanover next year at the latest, to which I would like to invite you today. But will trade fairs then be the same as before? I don't think so. I say they will become hybrid. Just in an industry before, digitization is here to stay, and that's a good thing. The paradigm shift is that in the future, both exhibitions and visitors will be able to participate in such an event hybrid or also purely digitally, with all the corresponding advantages and disadvantages. The pandemic here is a driver of digitalization and further development, and we are taking up this challenge. For now, we are looking forward to our purely digital event, which will be opened by the German Chancellor and the Indonesian President on April 12th, and I cordially invite you all to attend. Thank you very much for your attention, and now I wish you another exciting and successful event. And of course, I hope to meet you again personally as soon as possible again. Warm greetings from Hanover, Germany. All the best and take care. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Arno, and thanks to Deutsche Messe, the organizer of Hanover Messe. And again, please make some time to attend their digital event next week. With that, I'd like to introduce Ricardo Brunello, Head of Platforms at Telit, and Michael Finnegan, Associate VP at Multitech. Important to note before I hand things off that their bios and bios for all of our speakers today are easily available on the conference interface. We recommend that you take a look at those. Ricardo and Michael will set aside short time for Q&A, so we encourage you to submit any questions during their presentation, and we will save them for the end. If we don't get to your question during the session, never fear. We will have a record of those, and Ricardo and Michael will be able to address those offline. And with that, I hand off to Ricardo and Michael. Take us away.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Michael. Good morning, everyone. So let me start here with a very brief introduction. My name is Ricardo Brunello. I'm the head of Telit IoT Platforms. For the ones that are not familiar with the company, Telit is a global company. We're traded in London Stock Exchange. And basically, the only thing that we do is IoT. Telit is one of the largest pure IoT companies in the world, where we connect one new machine every 1 second. We are talking about more than 30 million machines connected every year from all the different in all the different sectors. Of course, that we're very focused on industrial, but we also have a strong presence in smart metering, smart cities, connected cars, and more. Michael, do you want to introduce yourself?
Well, sure. Thank you, Ricardo. Appreciate it. And happy to be here and participating in Hanover Messe. I have to say, I wish I could be there in person, but well, good afternoon, good morning or good evening, wherever you are. But pleasure to be sharing the stage here with you, Ricardo, and our long-term partnership with Telit and how we bring production environments on the edge for edge processing. This topic is great. I'm excited about getting started with you. So let's get started and jump into productivity.
Absolutely, Michael. I would say that, we already have the commitment to be in person next year in Germany after so many years. It's, a little bit unique to be here online, but certainly next year things will be different. Talking a little bit about technology, I have a firm belief that the technology is there not only because of the technology, but it's about what we can do with that. I really like this statement from Paul Krugman that he says, productivity isn't everything, but in the long run, it is almost everything. And I think this is what is really driving investments and development in IIoT and Industry 4.0. That is our ability of using this productivity on a disruptive way, on really making things better, faster, and with more quality. When I look some market research, and I really like to come back here to these McKinsey research, they say that certainly IoT is transforming the world as we know it. And I think this is in our daily life, it's very clear. The way that we use our AC today is connected with our phone. The way that we drive our cars, there are more cars being sold today that are connected than the ones that are not connected. But by looking carefully at the numbers, we see that the biggest impact of IoT, the biggest economic impact, comes in the industrial solutions, in factories, where more than a third of the impact will come from the application of this technology on the shop floor, on the way that things are produced. And McKinsey highlight here is specifically the possible impact of this technology that is impacting costs, reductions, and savings between 5 and 40%, depending on the level of digital maturity that the companies are, and of course the sectors that they are. So today, I think it's inevitable that every single company in the world is looking at this type of technology and thinking how they can innovate. For machine builders, the adoption of this technology can bring a significant change in terms of how they sell their machines, on how they can commercialize services on top of these machines. Instead of selling machines, providing machines as a service, providing more uptime, providing more productive machines, getting feedback from how customers are using their machines, and coming with better products at the end. For end customers, factories in general, it's very clear that this technology is transforming their business where they can be more data-driven, and as a consequence of that, improving their productivity and their competitiveness. Mike?
Yeah, so this world between where do we start, right? How do we get here, right? So as we look at these hardware solutions that started off many years ago, we had to take a proprietary approach to take hardware and be able to bring it into production. It starts off with proprietary protocols, and whether it's OPCA UA or maybe it's Modbus or maybe it's PLC integration, these have to evolve over a period of time. And typically, these solutions, as many of you know, are different from IT solutions, right? Where perhaps there's no context to the information that's being pulled. Or perhaps it's a polling and reverse response or response and retrieval system. Or these basically are isolated networks. So we have to bridge to these new IT solutions that are out there, which are data object modeling and contextual information in a more publishing and subscribing architecture. And so how do we bridge this gap between enterprise, and production? And I assert that we have to move to edge processing in the hardware layer and be able to have intelligent software at the edge to be able to bridge this gap. So let's take a look at how we bridge these two worlds together. Back to you, Ricardo.
And I like to use this slide here, Michael, to show how is one factory that is a non-IoT factory. And after applying Telit and multi-text technology, how we transform this non-IoT factory in a full IoT factory just like that. And as you can see, we're basically talking about the same type of environment, the same look and feel. But let's try to dig a little bit deeper and try to understand what makes a manufacturing site a real IoT site. I would say that it's not because they have maybe a nice Rockwell device here on this smart crane, maybe a Siemens controller inside this specific machine, or they have an 840D CNC here, AGVs moving parts around on the floor, the robot here on the right-hand side, or even sensors and cameras controlling productivity of the people and guaranteeing their safety. It's also not about the different types of IT components they have on their IT space, like their ERP systems, their databases, their MES, SCADA, and even data analytics and cognitive cloud solutions transforming data. What really makes this an IoT deployment is your ability of interconnecting all the different things, all the different legacy hardware and software with an intelligent layer of information. And basically, this is what we do for a living. This is what the challenges that we face every single day. And with the technology that we could develop, we have the ability of literally connecting all the different devices with native and open protocols, transforming this information in a common layer of information and integrating this with all the different IT systems. I think it's important for us to keep in mind that companies will not simply scrap all the different machines that they have on their production sites, and they will not change their IT systems because of IoT. Actually, IoT is the technology that will integrate these things, and this is where we are heavily investing our R&D resources in terms of making this scenario possible and making the adoption even easier. Mike.
So how do we integrate this, right? Is the big question on the production side, right? What do we do? And so taking a look at some things that are table stakes that we can't take out of that picture, like security and application development and custom integration. These are the production environments that need to exist today, but we need to be able to bookend these with new technologies, whether it's sensor integration on the far left, and to give new context and new information that can add to the overall picture. Perhaps that's done in an overlay environment, but I assert that it needs to be integrated directly into production. And this way we can be able to add even more context by adding analytics and machine learning and AI at the edge. And so let's take a look at the architecture, if we would, Ricardo, advance to the next slide. This architecture is one where you have to have hardware at the edge to interface in a production environment. And this is where we think that aligning with Telit and be able to integrate into these production systems makes a whole lot of sense. So this production environment is really an enterprise architecture, one in which has integration directly to end nodes using packet forwarding. So many people look at maybe LoRaWAN as a way to be able to aggregate sensor data into this architecture, but they've always typically think about packet forwarding out to a platform. But in a production environment, we would prefer to be able to keep that directly for these operational technologies to keep them on premise. So here's where edge processing really excels. The idea to be able to add lots of new sensor end nodes and be able to integrate them directly virtually, but have a direct integration into the systems that happen. And this is where Telit and Multitech come together to be able to have that edge processing that gets us into the production environment and takes that sensor information and brings us straight forward. Let's take a look at a use case that we worked on together in a production environment.
Yeah, Mike, I think this is a good slide for us to try to make things a little bit less generic. And let's talk about business. Let's talk about what we are doing today in terms of helping our customers on integrating to this exciting new technology. This specific slide here in architecture represents one real use case that we developed together with Multitech, and we are delivering for the largest packaging company in the world. This important customer has $18 billion in revenue, and they produce all different types of packaging machines for boxing, wrapping, and all the different types of hardware to be integrated in the manufacturing process. These machines, they come with very different types of controllers inside. Specifically, they use Bosch Rexroth, Siemens PLCs, and Rockwell PLCs, depending on the machine type that they have. One of the challenges they have is their customers require these machines to be intelligent and integrated to their IT systems, while the machine builder would like to change the way that they are going for the market. When instead of selling packaging machines, they would like to sell packaging as a service. They would like to guarantee that their machines will have a higher uptime ratio while getting their customers excited with this new technology. In just very few interactions with this customer, by integrating Telit device-wise software that is a full IIoT platform with the Multitech gateways, we could provide an end solution for this customer. Starting here on the left-hand side in this quadrant called Plant 1, by running device-wise inside the 4G Multitech gateways, we provide all the drivers for them to collect all this data in real time and all the IT connectors so these machines can get integrated with their customers' IT systems. And by providing a cloud solution, we can provide the digital twin for all these machines that are deployed in all the different customers. So this customer, their service team that is located in Atlanta, United States, can monitor all the different machines remotely. And if there is something happening with some specific machines that maybe are on the other side of the earth, maybe are in Hanover right now, instead of jumping into an airplane, they can open one tunnel, access the gateway, or even going one step further, opening one layer 2 tunnels and working on the ladder logic of the controllers, for example. By having this solution, they can provide to the customer the ability of seeing everything that is happening to their machines on a digital environment, on a digital twin, in a multi-platform. And on top of that, they understood that it was also important for them to have data analytics, and we use device-wise to integrate, for example, in this case with Microsoft Azure, where they can have also apps in these types of platforms. But Mike, I remember that you have a very interesting point about adding additional sensors and instrumentations to this scenario. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, thank you, Ricardo. So the interesting part about this, since we're already in the production environment and we're already starting to see this integration between plants, now is a great time to bring additional context to this by adding additional sensors. Whether, on the left, we're showing maybe a compressor and where compressed air is important for the production environment, we need to be able to monitor that and know that how that's operating. Or maybe it's a conveyance system or conveyor belt, and the motor that's bringing different devices that are, or items to you is starting to fail. This alert and notification is really important. But I think what's really a driver here is breathing new life into some of this manufacturing equipment by having HMI interfaces directly on to the shop floor that we can take directly from the hardware, from the device-wise, and be able to have a virtual button, which would never have been happening in the past. But now to be able to have new interfaces, new insights directly onto that production environment, literally breathing new life into some of these technologies that were implemented in the 70s, 80s, and 90s into 2021 systems. So let's take a look. How do we bring it all together? This value proposition of being able to take, a bundled package of hardware and software and many different solutions to be able to open up to the platform in an area called Quick Start. So as we look at all these different solutions, right, we have a great way to bring home a solution that can get people operational quickly. Ricardo, would you like to share a little bit about this integration?
Absolutely, Michael. You know that Telit, we are extremely excited about this partnership with Multitech, about the possibility of bundling hardware and software on this very disruptive scenario for IoT. I would say that, and by coincidence, I'm here in Florida in Boca Raton, where is our headquarters, because we came from IBM. And exactly here in the city, just across the street from where I am, Bill Gates in 1981 came to IBM and decided on a partnership bundle, a hardware and a software, on something that was very new at that time, that was the personal computer. And that completely disrupted the world. Do you think that that disruption would have happened if it was not by providing a complete solution out of the box? I don't think so. I think the brilliance of this partnership was that it provides all the functionalities in a single box, easy to be used for customers. And I would say that this is what we are doing, Michael. The integration of device-wise software platform with a multi-tech industrial gateways, it provides customers all the functionality that they need to have this implementation for smart machines, for machine builders, for connected factories. The device-wise platform is a solution that comes with hundreds of drivers. We have the most extensive list of drivers in the market. So with this beautiful blue box from Multitech, now with DeviceWise, you can collect all the native data from all the different machines and devices that you have. If you have machines that are controlled by Siemens, Omron, Rockwell, Mitsubishi, Fanuc, robots, torque tools, CNCs, all these drivers are available. You just appoint what is the IP address, and you have now all the tag tree auto-enumerated for you to read and write data from your machine. So you have all the vision of what is happening to this machine. With our Edge Logic engine, you can collect this data at the edge and transform. You can write math, you can write an algorithm, you can have triggers and alarms. So you monitor how these things are happening, and then you decide to take actions. These actions, you can push this data into your legacy IT systems, like your ERP system, your MES, your SCADA, databases, and more. You can use the cellular connectivity and control all your connectivity package with the software. You have in the cloud a digital twin that all the data coming from this machine can be populated in the cloud, so you can monitor and trend how things are happening and take actions in the cloud level by opening tunnels and having triggers happening in the cloud. We also have a very strong partnership with big cloud providers such as Amazon, AWS, Microsoft Azure, and others. So all the data that is collected from these machines, with a simple trigger, in less than 1 minute, you can start to send this data to these important clouds, so you can have apps, you can have all your data accumulated there. And something that is incredibly eye-catching, I strongly recommend you to take a look at, is DeviceWise View running in these gateways. DeviceWise View is a full SCADA system that you can use to integrate to your machines. So these gateways, they can work as an HMI for your machines. For you to build any type of HMI or dashboard, is just like you build a PowerPoint presentation. You just select your widget, drag and drop, appoint to the variable in your machine or on your external sensors. The LoRa provides you all this ability of external instrumentation, and now you have a complete solution out of the box. For you to have a connected machine or a connected factory, it doesn't take months or years anymore. It is an effort of very few days, and it's really incredible how this quick started package that Multitech and Telit is putting together can provide all these solutions.
So just to wrap up and bring it home, as they say, looking at a way to be able to take what Arno said earlier in the presentation, how to take digital transformation, which typically would happen in the cloud, and bring it directly on the edge with microservices directly from the Telit platforms, directly onto the gateways, into a production environment, and taking LoRaWAN architectures to bring the best of telemetry and sensors directly onto the platform. We think that they can see production environments that are secure, safe, and be able to move directly right out of the box. And within a very short period of time, say an hour, you could be up and operational in with this turnkey solution. So we thank you for your time. And back to you, Ricardo, and to Keith for, I think, some questions and answers coming up.
Yeah, we've got a couple, and thank you guys, Ricardo and Michael. Thanks so much. Really good stuff, I tell you, and quite a presentation. I've never seen it delivered better. Sort of the integration of ops, technology, and IT really made it quite clear, and we appreciate it. First, a question about Quick Start and DeviceWise. Is the point of this integration and this cooperation between the two companies, is the point of this to increase speed to deployment? And, if so, what are the other benefits? Can you just talk to us about that?
Keith, I would say absolutely yes. It changes completely the dynamics of the creation of these types of applications. If you start with, trying to develop all by yourself from scratch, it's going to take a lot of money and time and effort for you to have one solution like this. By adding custom code to these types of industrial IoT solutions, it is extremely risky and costly. This integration provides customers all the functionalities that they need, from the data collection, the data transformation, the monitoring and integration of machines and systems in one extremely reliable box. Even though Telit works with multiple technology providers, we are extremely confident about the quality and reliability of the multi-tech boxes, and that's why we decided to move forward with this initiative. And we are already seeing some very good results in the market with more and more customers using it.
Right.
Taking 25% global market share on the hardware and this world-renowned software, bringing these together just makes it, a lot easier for customers to not have to go through the guesswork, because these have already been in production for well over 5 to 7 years right now in this collaboration. We're just now getting to the point where we can operationalize it and bring it into production in a faster, more meaningful way.
Great stuff. I've got an audience question here, which is, implementing 5G and IIoT in massive IoT type deployments. What are the challenges that exist for doing that in smart factories, or for that matter, in smart cities?
I would start that the first challenge is, okay, you have a beautiful technology in terms of communications. How you populate this network with the legacy machines. My robot was bought 5 years ago. My CNC was bought 10 years ago. That old press that I have down there, it was bought 25 years ago. Now how I make these machines to be 5G ready? And also important, what do I do with the data when I collect the data? So I would say that the first challenge is how you can really embrace the existing things into this network. And then how you can transform this data in a way that you can really bring business transformations, output, increase of productivity to your machine. And I think that we go in this direction with the partnership with Multitech that is providing all these links to the real world, to the real machine and IT connectivity.
Yeah, great point, Ricardo. These 5G networks in general, I think, will offer a great deal of promise, including private networks that get deployed through slicing and/or private, shared infrastructures through CBRS. These are going to be great ways to be able to take these private environments and truly make them wireless on the factory floor. So that's exciting. But to Ricardo's point, these CNC machines and/or these production machines are probably not ready for that amount of speed in real time. In some cases, absolutely for the protocols that are needed in real time. But we need to find a way to be able to mix this public and private world in the production and make it happen. And that's an evolution too. I think that's probably the next phase that we're going to see to really bring down almost the latency down to almost sub 10 milliseconds to make that happen. But we're going to see that evolution. We're already seeing this in production right now. And so the natural overlay is taking that virtualization that happens in the cloud and on the edge and be able to privatize it. So we'll see a lot more happening in that area.
Hey guys, we're right up against it, but there's one more question from the audience that I'd like to squeeze in here. So please be brief, but the asker asks, would Siemens, and I don't think they mean to pick out Siemens, it could be Fanuc, it could be ABB or Bosch, would ops tech companies and other participants in a integration like this be concerned about data security with this new integration between the companies?
Excellent question. The answer is definitely no. Our drivers, they are non-invasive. So the way that we write these drivers, they guarantee all the protection of the devices. We work with all these large automation companies. They are also customers and partners of us. This type of technology is already deployed in some of the largest companies in the world. 7 out of the 10 largest car makers in the world, they use this technology today, and there is all the security measures are in place there.
Yeah,
Great
these
stuff.
TR50 integration standards. I think that Telit has really driven home on a security model, and then adding that in with hardware and hardware encryption layers really satisfy a lot of the security needs. I think seeing that they're already in production makes it move directly into operations. So thank you.
Terrific stuff, guys. Hey, I'm sorry to cut you off. I could go on, and I'm sure the audience could as well. But we do want to move into our next session. And so Ricardo and Michael, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
With this, I'd like to hand off to Jim Morrish, who is a principal and founding partner at Transform Insights, a relatively new but already very well-known analyst firm in the IoT space. Jim will be moderating a panel of true domain experts on the subject of low-power wide-area communication. Jim, thanks, welcome, and please take us away.
Thank you very much, Keith. Thank you for that introduction. So I'm actually going to open up with a few slides here and then introduce the presenters. So if I just advance these slides. So this session is a panel session. This is low power wide area networks about sensorizing the enterprise. And what we're going to do, we're going to start with some brief presentations, one from myself to introduce the LPWA topic in general. And then we're going to have Arne Assmann from Once. We're going to have RJ Joseph from iBasis, Curtis Govan from FlowLive, and Fernando Lobreguet from Bix, who are going to give us their perspectives on LPWA and sensorizing the networks. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have a panel discussion about some of the points raised in the presentation so far, and we're also going to discuss a case study. And we're going to take questions from the audience as well. So that's the flow that's going to happen over the next 80 minutes or so. So to my introduction. Firstly, I should introduce Transform Insights. As Keith mentioned, we're a new company, a new industry analyst firm, launched in 2019. We're aiming to focus much more on an evidence-based approach to understanding best practice and building best practices, vendor selection databases, and databases of digital transformation case studies, which number about 700 now, developing granular forecasts and provide insight on key technology trends. And the aim is to be evidence-led rather than opinion-led. So we're trying to slightly change that approach to the industry analyst space, covering all of digital transformation. So there's a graphic here, which is probably too small to read, but it's available on our home site, on our website, and there's a list of 12 technology groups on the left-hand side, including things like Internet of Things and connectivity and AI and blockchain and so on. And those are the things that we think are going to drive future digital transformation. So that's enough about us. What I want to do now is provide a little bit of background to this panel, because this panel is about low power wide area and sensorizing the networks. Well, first question is, what's LPWA? So LPWA is an acronym for low power wide area networks, network connectivity. Really what we mean by that are the 3GPP, i.e. mainstream cellular technologies, Nbiot and LTE-N, which are together called MMTC or turned MMTC. And there are significant other players in the market, such as LoRaWAN, Sigfox. There's a few others, but really, the core of the market is defined by the cellular operators and MMTC, and LoRa and Sigfox. Those are the main players in the space. So what is LPWA and what does it do? Well, starting on the left-hand side of this slide, looking at the technical perspective, the characteristics of LPWA connections is, really the main differentiating characteristic is the low power requirements. So we're talking about devices that can potentially have a battery life of up to 10 years. And that enables some really transformational things that can be done with wide area connectivity and assumed coverage, which brings us on to our next difference, which is the fact that this wide area coverage can be assumed, and that can either be nationwide, citywide, or within a campus, depending on the deployment. But the point is that in principle, you can take an LPWA device out of the box, deploy it, switch it on a battery for 10 years, and it connects to a wireless network, a wide area network, and it's just connected. It kind of works. And that's really quite a compelling proposition for certain IoT applications. There's also a strong link budget, which allows for good in-building coverage, which is quite important, in terms of building those networks. It's low cost. So it's cheap to set up the networks to support LPWA devices. The device cost is low. They're quite simple devices, and the traffic costs are low. So it's a cheap solution, which again, it means it costs seen in various new situations. The trade-off for these good points, for the battery for the extended battery life, for the wide area connectivity, and for the low cost, the trade-off is that these devices are generally low bandwidth, and potentially just a few bytes of information transmitted at infrequent periods. Although there is a spectrum in terms of the throughput that can be supported. More traffic, of course, impacts battery life, shortens battery life, and there's a lot that you can do with just a few bytes. If there's a few bytes from a bridge sensor, it says there's an abnormal vibration on this bridge. You only need a few bytes of information to convey to you that message. So these things can be quite powerful, even though the information conveyed can be quite limited. So from an application perspective, what can you do with these things? Well, lots of tracking solutions are quite suitable. So tracking things like pallets or distribution cages, or really quite detailed and granular tracking of assets through supply chains. Infrastructure monitoring, I've already mentioned, vibration sensors on bridges. You can fit a vibration sensor to a bridge and leave it running on its battery for 10 years, and if anything odd happens in those 10 years, you'll hear about it. That's kind of a new potential deployment versus other competing technologies, and things like trigger devices. So the use of a trigger saying that a lifesaver at a dockside has been used. Again, you can leave that just running away on its battery for 10 years. And disposable devices. There are some intriguing deployments around direct marketing. So a direct marketing pack sent out with a direct response button, and if the recipients press the button, then it sets up some further actions to follow up on that sales opportunity. And again, those are cheap enough to be disposable. Connected wide area, so when the person opens them at home, they're connected. They connect to a wide area network. Some quite compelling propositions there, all tracking individual packages through a distribution chain. And the net result of this is that many new applications are viable. So things that couldn't be supported by technologies other than LPWA, or not sensibly sort of supported anyway. So this is the parcel tracking and the vibration sensors on the bridges and so on. There are increased volumes for some applications. So things like tracking of children or assisted living applications, you'd expect to find more devices. So similar applications, but more devices because LPWA technology exists. And some technologies will be displaced. So things like using power line communications, in the case of smart metering, they could be substituted by some of these LPWA technologies. So LPWA enables the addressing of new markets, it expands markets, and it displaces some of the technologies. That's what LPWA is. Quick history of LPWA. on this slide. So really precisely, LPWA started off at the beginning of 2013 because it was me that named it. And before then, we had a number of operations in the market. A number of companies were active in different areas, but I spotted that these things are all heading in the same kind of direction and were unlocking a new range of opportunities. So I termed these providers LPWA, and the term seems to have stuck. The market really got going in 2014, 2015 time, when Huawei acquired Newell, and that technology basically got baked into Nbiot, which is the backbone of what cellular providers will be offering when they say LPWA. The LoRa Alliance was founded in 2015, and things started to get traction then with Vodafone launching Nbiot services in 2017. By 2019, there were 100 million LoRaWAN connections at the end of the year. Nearly 100 million cellular networks. By 2026, there's going to be more LPWA connections than non-LPWA cellular connections. So 2.18 billion versus 2.17. And by 2030, there'll be about 4 billion LPWA connections worldwide. So that's really a fast emerging and quite compelling group of technologies. Just to drill into those numbers a little with my last slide, just to provide a little more background. Of those 4 billion connections that I mentioned by 2030, about 2/3 will be MMTC. So those are the cellular versions of LPWA, Nbiot, and LTE-M, offered by cellular operations. About 97% of those will use public networks. The remainder will use license-exempt spectrum, with technologies such as LoRaWAN and Sigfox, and those are roughly evenly split between private and public networks. Significant upside potential on those numbers. I mentioned disposable applications of LPWA. So the direct response marketing, etc. There is potential really for those to drive very significant volumes of LPWA connections. In terms of where these connections are going to be, well, 71% of connections will be enterprise. The 29%, the flip 29% will be consumer. A little over 20% of those enterprise connections, or 20 percentage points of the 71, will be cross-vertical, looking at things like environmental monitoring, track and trace, which are verticals, and the rest are sector-specific, and the largest share of that are smart metering. So you've got electricity smart metering, which is mostly going to be supported by ONTC cellular operators, and gas and water smart metering, which will mostly be supported by the likes of LoRa and Sigfox. There's variations to that, of course, but that's broadly how it falls. And thereafter, there's a very fragmented, extremely wide range of applications that LPWA can support. So that's a brief introduction to LPWA. And at that point, I'm going to stop, and I will hand over to Anna Asman of Want to take you through his perspective on LPWA.
Yeah, thanks, Jim, and thanks for everyone for having me here today to discuss and to elaborate a little bit on the opportunities and use cases on LPWA. And let me quickly allow myself to introduce you to Want if you haven't heard of us yet. So what we are and what we do is, and I think Jim already made clear that we're talking about a huge opportunity in the IoT space. So LPWA will become a very huge portion of the market, of the IoT market. However, I think what we quickly understood with the core team of Want was, okay, this market will go for different rules. So the market, and especially the use cases, will have very different requirements than usually IoT applications have been prior to that. So we came up with a very disruptive and new kind of offering for connectivity for such kind of LPWA-based use cases, which is something that we invented with Want, which we call the IoT flat rate, which is nothing more, I think everyone knows, such kinds of prepaid offerings that are pretty common in the IoT and telco sphere. However, this is basically what we do. We come only from the IoT perspective. So Want is an IoT pure play company. We are only focusing on connectivity and IoT. Hence, all the team everyone in the company, and we're more than 120 people since we've been founded in 2017, is purely dedicated to IoT. And just to give you a background of who we are and what once was about, so we are a privately held company who have been founded by Alexander Pisater, who is the lead investor, and we quickly attracted bigger MNOs, and for instance, Deutsche Telekom quickly decided to go for it, to take a share in once as well. So Deutsche Telekom AG is a share holder of once as well. And nowadays, after almost over 3 years of activity in the market, we are spread all over the world with offices in, of course, Europe, but also in Asia and soon in the US as well. And this is what we came up with, and which we are quite known already in the market, which is our connectivity IoT flat rate. So it is a prepaid offering saying, okay, you only have to pay once, and you get all the features that are necessary and are required to connect your IoT application for a long time. This is basically the offering, and this basically takes into account the specific requirements of LPWA-based use cases, which basically comprise of low value. So the assets themselves very often have low value in itself. Also, the data transmissions that are being, the data packets that are being transmitted are very simple, like Jim already mentioned. And of course, we're talking very often of large estates of devices. Hence, the cost and the margin is a very critical factor that we try to accomplish with this offering. And this is what we have done already now, and why this is already, I think, has already some traction in the market. So we have won now over 4,000 customers, and actually we're now over 4,500. And we've connected over 5 million connections already, and became quickly one of the fastest growing IoT connectivity providers in Europe. And partnering only with tier 1 players in the market, which is essentially, and I will maybe dwell on that a little bit later, with tier 1 partners. So we're partnering with Deutsche Telekom, China Telecom, but also with security players like G&D, but also with cloud environment providers like AWS, in order to really provide secure and reliable and most resilient solutions. And the beauty of IoT and the beauty of connectivity is it is ubiquitous, so it can be utilized in almost every industry. Hence, we're talking about IIoT today and the utilization of LPWA in the industrial automatization and manufacturing space. However, I think there are more and more use cases that will come up, and this is basically still the beautiness of the whole market. But just to give you an understanding of what we are currently doing, also in the industrial automatization space, is that we have also, of course, that once is being used for industrial gateways, like for instance here with a company called AutoZen, which is a spin-off company of the one of the biggest sensor manufacturers in the world, the IFM group. And AutoZen is just specializing on creating disruptive plug-and-play solutions for sensor-based solutions. Hence, this solution, it's called the IoT, which is a collaboration of several companies working together, like once as participating with the connectivity, but also then software AG bringing into the IoT platform, but also then IFM and AutoZen with the sensors and the technology and the IO-Link standard interface and all the industrial interfaces that need to be adapted. Last but not least, just to give another example that we're not just purely focusing on industrial IoT, but also on smart cities and more innovative use cases. This is a use case on smart cities with FlashNet, now part of the ANGI group, that is going to equip a lot of estates of street lights all over Europe with us, basically utilizing NB-IoT, which is one of the reasons I wanted to showcase this use case, because here it gets very clear where the benefits are, that because the low cost, but also then the very simple transmissions that are being transmitted over the networks really allow for cost-sensitive solutions. And that's basically what we try to want to achieve here with once. And that's my quick intro. And I would like to hand over to the next. AJ, take it from you.
Thank you, Arne. So just a little bit of introduction about iBasis as to who we are. So iBasis is one of the largest wholesalers in the world. So we started our grounding in voice first. We're one of the leaders in that, wholesale voice. Soon after that, we stepped into mobile roaming, one of the leaders in that as well. And then next we got into IoT. One of the things that iBasis brings to the table is with the relationships that we have with mobile operators across the world. We indirectly serve about 1.5 billion subscribers around the world. And so through that, we can also cover through our roaming portfolio as well as through the relationships. We have a eSIM offering where we bring on profiles from different operators. And using that, we can cover both locally as well as via roaming connectivity. So it's global connectivity, and that's the area that we're focused on. Just to give you a quick sense in terms of our expertise, we're very deep in the network part. There are lots of patents to back the work that we do, both on the specifically in the IoT side of the house, and it's globally relevant. We've been recognized in the industry across both on the voice part and the mobile part, as well as in the IoT part. And that's just a brief introduction about who we are. What I want to then get into is just something more educational on where does the low power part fit into the bigger spectrum, so to say, of connectivity. So what we're seeing right now is there's a lot of LTE that's deployed. On the low power side, it's typically called either Nbiot or Ltem. Initially with 4G spectrum, also migrating the same kind of technology with a different radio, migrating also to 5G. And on the 5G side, you obviously have use cases which are not just the narrowband side, but also the extremely high data use cases as well. But I want to focus more on the parts that are on the left. So Nbiot is typically for very low data. That's typically the use cases. It's more for also very high battery usage for the devices. And Jim had already covered some of the stuff regarding what are the typical use cases. It's got very good in-building penetration. There's also a mode of Nbiot, which is where you could preserve more battery usage by not having the IP channel, for example, but doing most of the data transport using signaling. It's still not commonly used. So one of the challenges that's out there is with Nbiot is, and specifically with eSIMs, what you do have is the ability of having multiple profiles, the ability of switching them. Nbiot does have some limitations relative to SMS. It's typically not supported in Nbiot. And so there are networks, and specifically we see this with the US guys, where there's a need for firmware over-the-air updates where they actually can control the connections and the talking to the devices, so that if the devices go rogue or they need to update them, there's an ability of actually doing FOTA. So Nbiot is typically not ideal for that. You have some similar properties and some very different properties also with Ltem. The data rates are much higher. It can also support voice. And in both of these, you have what's called PSM&E DRX, which is the ability of basically putting the device to sleep, so to say, so that it uses less of network resources and hence preserves the battery. And the Ltem is definitely most suitable for the FOTA part compared to Nbiot. In terms of what are we seeing with respect to both Ltem and Nbiot, we have these operational in about 28 countries for Ltem, 14 countries for Nbiot. And the offering that we have is an offering with an eSIM where you have different profiles where you can actually switch. The Nbiot is actually quite restrictive about this. It's something that the standards groups are actually working on, and also Nbiot roaming, which is a challenge right now. So what are we seeing in the market? What we see is a lot more LTEM deployments compared to Nbiot deployments. The Nbiot deployments are actually, what we see is more challenging compared to the LTEM ones. One of the issues that we do have with Nbiot is a lot of the deployments we go after are more global in nature compared to in a particular country, because that's typically more for the MNO itself. And so when you're going after global deployments where you need Nbiot coverage in multiple countries, and they have to be seamless, roaming agreements have to be built, and given that there's no profile switching, that becomes a hole. Both PSM and eDRX, we're seeing that actually becoming more and more active. In terms of number of Nbiot deployments network-wide in the world, it's a lot higher than LTEM. But in terms of seamlessness between them, that's the challenge part. On the LTEM side, what we do see is, from an operator point of view, deploying LTEM is a lot more straightforward for them compared to deploying Nbiot. Nbiot is more a new rollout that needs to happen. LTEM is more a software upgrade. And depending on the operator that you choose, there is a pretty good ecosystem from a roaming point of view that we see specifically on the LTM side. So, and with that, I'd like to pass it over to Curtis.
Excellent. Thank you, Ajay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Curtis Govan, I'm president of Americas for Flow Live. What I'll do is just give you a quick introduction to Flow Live. As all of my colleagues have done here, we are a well-funded IoT connectivity infrastructure company. We're headquartered in the UK, and we have regional offices in Europe, North America, and Asia. And as you can see under the industry recognition here, our solutions are well recognized across the IoT industry. Those solutions include a globally distributed core network. We have a real-time connectivity and device management platform, a patented smart SIM to manage multiple profiles, as Ajay was noting here. We also have a full stack BSS. It's important to note about our solutions that we developed and fully own all of our technology. We built it from the ground up, and we own the IP. This is important because it really allows us to fully integrate all of the components and ensure that they're operating in the most efficient way. In addition to that, it gives us really unprecedented control over cost. And it also allows us to be highly flexible when it comes to how quickly we deploy and how we deploy the solution. We're able to deploy in public cloud or physical data centers and do so very quickly. When you look at kind of like our perspective on IoT and IoT for manufacturing in general, we really see that it's not about just devices. It's about service. Whether that service is internal, where hardware uptime is the chief consideration, or it's an external service where you're looking at logistics there, and that's the focus. In either case, when we talk to manufacturers and enterprise companies around the world, among the many things that they're considering, security of data is of utmost concern, security of their IT infrastructure, network performance and resiliency when it comes to the connectivity infrastructure and managing that. The complexity of the solution, when we talk to people that have global deployments, that is a chief concern for them as well. And then when you get into things that are outside of their core functionality, roaming regulations there and restrictions there, that's a concern to them. And certainly last but not least, it would be the cost of the overall solution and supporting it. Right? If you look at who we are and what we do at Flow Live, fundamentally, we are focused on solving these problems. And the reason why we're focused on it is because we want our customers, whether they be enterprise customers, manufacturers, MVNOs, MNOs, we want them to be able to focus on their core business there. So, one of the key elements that we have in our solution is our globally distributed core network that's supported by a global IMC library. And what's key about that is this allows devices to localize connectivity, and so that they're always connected in the same simple and secure way anywhere in the world, which is very important when you look at these global deployment solutions there. The other thing that we have is with multiple core networks around the world, we have local breakouts that will allow you to ensure that you have the most highest performing network in terms of throughput and as well as low latency, which we've already heard is very critical for battery consumption and other needs there for LPWAN devices there. And of course, like all of our solutions are supported by a cloud-based real-time connectivity management platform behind the scenes there. As many of us have done, I'll just take a quick look at one of our more relevant use cases for LPWAN, for smart labels here. This is a solution that I say it really has what I think are indicative of 4 loads that we see repeatedly for LPWAN solutions. Low latency for battery consumption that was mentioned earlier, and low data consumption. This is a device that really only reports a small amount of data a few times a day is needed. And then the other piece that's critical for here, I think this was mentioned earlier, is the low lifespan. This device actually has a lifespan of 6 to 12 months, and then they throw it away. So at the end of its lifespan there, it goes in the trash. Obviously, because of the factors above, low cost comes into play as well. And as I noted earlier, because we own and control most of the connectivity solution, this positions us to uniquely support use cases like these and IoT use cases just in general. So that is a brief introduction to Flow Live. Again, thank you for attending today, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the panel discussion.
Thank you. And last but not least, can we have Fernando Lopez?
Yes. Hi. Thanks, Jim and the IMC for having me today. So Fernando Llobregat, I'm the head of sales for IoT for enterprises in BICS. And I have been working for around 10 years in the IoT environment, in the network, in the solutions space, and for the last 3 years focusing on the cellular connectivity aspect of the IoT solutions. So to start with, just a quick introduction about who is BICS, because it's true that we are not a well-known company out of the wholesale telecom space. So we are a wholesale communications providers. As you see with some of the figures in the slides, we have a kind of solid revenue and customer base. We have around 1,000 mobile operators among our customers and more than 500 digital companies that are also part of our customer portfolio and that use our services to close the gap really between the telecommunications and the internet world. When it comes to IoT and IoT connectivity services, what we are doing is that we leverage our global interconnection network with the mobile operators and our direct reach that we have today with more than 1,000 mobile destinations worldwide. Just as a note, we calculate that more or less 50% of the world's data roaming traffic is transmitted via our network. So then regarding the IoT market, as a connectivity supplier company, we have a very horizontal approach. We are totally industry and use case agnostic, but on the other side, we have developed some platforms and solutions that really target the companies that are building the devices and the vertical IoT applications. You see there in the center of the slides, because those companies, they develop the industry solutions, the OEMs, the device manufacturers, we consider that they are really the foundations of the IoT projects, and this is where really the projects start. As a note, we recently has engaged with Avnet, which is one of the biggest electronic component distributors worldwide, in a strong collaboration, because both companies, really our target is to make sure that the connectivity comes as soon as possible in the design and engineering phase of the IoT, of the future IoT devices and solutions. Then more on that, when we deal with connectivity with our customers, and I think, AJ already went through that, and will be one of the topics of the roundtable. We really need to be able, as a connectivity provider, to propose to our customers all the available LP1 technologies. This diagram, which is similar in the sense that we know that there is not a single technology that will work for all the use cases, but eventually the communication technology choices will depend on the use case, on the geographical scope of the project, but also on the cost and the volumes assumptions that the customer has for them. In any case, independently on the communication technology, the biggest value proposition, and in general, I guess the value proposition of a connectivity provider needs to be to offer the capabilities to manage, to control, and to monetize the connectivity services independently of the communication technology that is chosen. And as we will discuss later on, this is a kind of a challenge because, well, not all the technologies or the deployments are going as fast as the whole industry was expecting. And then just to close with some use cases, we have selected two, which are somehow in two sides of the spectrum. This one we are showing here is with a German company. It's called German Bionics, and they are using our connectivity services to connect to their cloud applications those exoskeletons that are used for the manufacturing floor. Clearly here, the connectivity services must be available in any geographical site, in any country, because of course this facilitates quite a lot the kind of plug and play, turn it on and it has to work, that this company and his customers need to make sure that those deployments go as fast as possible. Also, regarding the technology, in this specific case, well, they need high bandwidth, high throughput. So it's also important for them to make sure that independently on where the exoskeleton is going to be deployed, well, they have at least a 4G LTM connection available. And then a second case, I think is quite similar to the one that Arne already presented. It's about industry. And in this case, the example is another German company who is deploying devices that are used to collect sensor data from machines, vehicles, building. And here, well, the value proposition, besides, of course, the guaranteeing a certain quality of service in terms of cellular coverage, is that for those companies, having a single management platform and a single company facilitates a lot all their logistics and their deployment situations, because for them, all the connectivity is embedded from the industry and then, in the manufacturing space, and then is delivered to any customer in any point of the world, and it simply works. That's also some of the added points of these of the solutions that we are providing to them. So that's it from our side, on big side. Over to you, Jim.
Thank you very much. Thanks to everyone for the presentations. Can I ask you all to come back on camera so that we can start the panel session?
Sure.
Great. Thanks, everybody. And in fact, I'm going to start off with a few questions that have come in from the audience, specific questions to follow up on those presentations. So we'll cover those up quickly and then move to panel discussion. So firstly, does BICS support public safety enterprise networks with IoT services?
Public? Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Enterprise network.
Yeah, I think in some countries we do, right?
Okay, excellent, yeah. Thank you. So for FlowLive, does FlowLive support a smart factory solution using CBRS-based private LTE NB-IoT networks using 3.5 gigahertz spectrum?
Yeah, that was very specific. In fact, yes, we do We have some early engagements. Just in general, we're seeing a lot of traction in the private networking space there. People that are looking forward to 5G, but starting now with CBRS solutions there. So we provide the full stack of the private network and partner with a RAN provider on the CBRS side, but definitely a solution that we support for private networks.
Okay, thank you. And a question for Ajay. So with cellular IoT, Nbiot, LTE-M communications, what coverage and penetration are possible inside buildings?
Yeah, so for NB-IoT, at least the theory is that NB-IoT, because the bit rate is a lot less and the link budgets are better, it has better in-building penetration compared to the other LTE technologies. So, but you know, this is going to be dependent on the frequency that's used. It's going to be dependent on, you know, how far inside the building you are, all of that. So it's not a, it's more a qualitative answer as opposed to a quantitative answer. Yeah?
Okay. Thank you very much. So please keep the questions coming in. We'll pick those up as they do come in, as they fit into the discussion. Let's start off with a general question, though. What are the main opportunities and challenges around LPWA today? And Arnold, do you want to take that first?
Sure, thanks. Let me quickly think of that. So opportunities, challenges. So basically, I think your intro already gave a glimpse of what the challenges could be. Basically, I'd say it allows really to go for use cases that were formerly not really feasible or economically reasonable because of their, let's say, requirements and their characteristics. Like I said earlier, I think a lot of new use cases will look like that they will have very low value assets that will be connected. So assets like asset tracking devices or really smart small sensors in the field that just have a very simple task to do, and hence the data itself is also of low value and is quite simple and even dumb. So again, I think here lies also the opportunity, but also the challenge, because I think what IoT customers and developers and solution providers should always look or somewhat think of is how to really have a good mixture between value of the proposition and the use cases versus technical capabilities and technical possibilities, which is not always, I think, doing all the things that you could do does not always make sense to really enable all of those. Hence, it's always a tricky question. And very often the value lies in just transmitting simple status updates on a device, just giving updates, like, for instance, take COVID, where we know about the CO2 situation in a room or so, and just gives you a nod or an alert if the values are maybe not in scale. So there is the value and not in the technical capabilities. And that always remains a little bit the challenge because it's a margin game that we're looking for.
Absolutely, it very much is the case that a small piece of data and the right kind of data at the right time can be very impactful. You don't need the very high broadband connectivity to make really impactful solutions. Does anybody else have any thoughts about the main opportunities and challenges around LPWA today?
I would say, Jim, if I may, that right now is the time to really set the right expectations. I like in one of Jay's slides, he mentioned about the roaming agreements and the speed at what these roaming agreements are deploying. This is something that it's our duty of all of us to be very clear towards customers, because this is really managing expectations. Some of those customers and some of the examples that all of you showed, these customers are foreseeing industrial deployments. They are foreseeing manufacturing. So they need to know what is going to come and when, in terms of coverage, in terms of speed, in terms of availability. So today, one of the challenges is really to set the right expectations. If I can say, really maybe slow down a little bit the hype. The technology is here. But as we saw in some of the slides, there is still some work to be done in terms, for example, of network availability and maybe cost of the semiconductors. I mean, there is still some work, and we all have some, as an industry, some homework to do in this respect.
Yeah, can I just add another point related to this? Thanks, Fernando, which is, you know, a lot of times modems are made by the module makers, semiconductor manufacturers that basically have both LTEM and Nbiot capability. Now, if you have a deployment that is actually going and it's multi-country deployment, and it's not just multi-country, even in a particular country where it may not be all turned up, if you don't have either LTEM or Nbiot coverage, you don't have a fallback. Yeah. And that is the technology is in its infancy right now. And so that's something that we need to be cognizant of, and especially when we are relating that to customers, because the modem manufacturers have invested hundreds of millions of dollars trying to build their stuff and bring it out to market. They're expecting connectivity to just work like that, just like you know, the high data LTE works. But it's not there yet. It will happen. It's a matter of maturity of the market. And that is something that we really need to be sensitive to. And the other aspect of it is, my sense is between Nbiot and LTEM, if you look at all the analyst reports, okay, you're talking about, depending on who you talk to, 10 billion, 20 billion, 50 billion devices. The majority of them, a lot of them, the high growth is going to be definitely in cellular. And out of that high growth in cellular, a lot of that is expected to come out from LPWA. But for that to really happen, the coverage layer has to be seamless. So today, if you were to look at, you know, the United States, Western Europe, you have some of that, but it's not omnipresent across the world.
Definitely.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. No.
Yeah, this is Curtis. So I would just echo what my colleagues are saying here. But I think fundamentally what it comes down to is knowledge. I think the opportunities for LPWA are limitless. But as we're doing here, and I think that's an important part of this group, we've got to continue to educate the industry on some of those key challenges there and point them in the right direction. It's just a matter that it can be difficult to understand all of this technology and who has what and what's best. And, those challenges that Ajay mentioned, like where is roaming a challenge? I don't know that. I'm just going to work in a silo and try to get a device connected without understanding some of the broader challenges in the industry. So I love that we as a group are working to educate the community on some of those things.
Yes, thank you for that. And several people have mentioned roaming as a specific challenge, and that's something I want to circle back on in a few minutes. Yeah, a few moments. Unpick that roaming challenge. But firstly, just to finish off on the view of the potential, could you give an example of a company that you think has got it right with their adoption of LPWA and what they've done with LPWA? Did anyone want to take that? Arne, do you want to take that?
Sure. It's hard to say who does it right. I just can see, companies that are doing it in a clever way and really create value. And there is one specific company, maybe not necessarily in the industrial automatization or manufacturing area, but more in the, let's say, automotive area, where I see Nbiot being used in a very, let's say, in a way that it's not necessarily supposed to be used. So it's about a company that is using Nbiot to update its price tags for automotive, for cars. And interestingly, it allows them to really go for price tags that consume very low power, and they just have an LCD display, and it works with very few energy, and hence the lifetime of those devices is a little bit longer also than using the advantages of Nbiot. But maybe just why brought up this solution is they're not doing it necessarily the way Nbiot is supposed to be used, because actually when you look at the specifications and how it has been invented, you could say it has been invented for smart metering. But now you can see it has been used for a use case that is far off, so it does not necessarily need deep indoor penetration and maybe not even the low power, but it just utilizes the low, the form factor, and of course then the very clever way of transmitting data. And that's interesting how they use this technology, and that's basically my statement. I think we need to make those technologies available to customers and see what's coming up, and which is something that we try to do with Once. Really make those technologies available and not necessarily make barriers up to it, because they might not, let's say, even hard to reach, or it's of course it has a price, but not maybe for the IoT in the first place, for customers who want to explore the opportunities. Hence, we really want to engage customers to test and to utilize the technology that is already there and given, and then maybe think of in a later stage of what is the real value of their solution.
Okay, thank you. And does anybody else have a view on a company that got it right and really is leveraging LPWA in an effective way? Curtis, do you have an example?
Yeah, I mean, I'd go back to the smart label solution that I mentioned before. One, I think they really got it right, but they had a long history in IoT, which is important factor there. It's kind of, that learning curve just wasn't there for them. So they knew most of the challenges there. And then also, LPWAN itself addressed, their chief thing is low cost device with long battery life. So the technology caught up to what their demands were there. And then the other piece that I think is really good for their perspective is they had clear visibility into the whole ecosystem. The device, the SIM, the various network performances around the world, their end customers and what their local environments were like as well. And they rigorously tested the solution on a global basis. And one of the things I think Ajay noted as well, that if you have NB-IoT around the world, you're going to be in trouble. So you need LTE-M as a backup, and that's one of the things they have, and built that into their battery performance requirements there. The need to be able to fall back and use two different technologies.
Okay, thank you. Does Fernando, Ajay, do you have?
I'll just. So from our point of view, we have lots of use cases, all the way from dog collars, panic buttons, defibs. It's bird tracking. It's across the board, but. The points that I raised earlier is we're very early on in terms of where we are with respect to what the possibilities are, what could be done. So in terms of saying somebody's doing it the right way, I think it's a bit early on to say, as in, how's this going to work out? Who's going to be taking the market share? Because we've been in touch with a lot of the MNOs as well that are deploying this, and they have the exact same problem. It's not so it's a universal problem in terms of the overall coverage. So until that actually becomes flat in a way, that's going to have create friction relative to the overall uptake of LPWA.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that's why it's important to set the expectations. But regarding, the point of companies who got it right, from our side, as Ajay said, we have many vertical use cases. But one of the companies with whom we work, and that I really have more, let's say, admiration, if I can say, for the way they do, is that they are an OEM, and actually they take an approach to connectivity which is kind of like a service. So right now, they really embed the connectivity in their IT systems. So they really kind of become a reseller of connectivity. And I think that from an industrial perspective, and here I guess in the audience there are many people from the industry, this is also, let's say, something that you need to get right, because this allows to integrate the connectivity in your IT processes. So you can activate, deactivate, control, switch, funnel the connectivity, whatever you need, and maybe try to even overcome those issues we have today with roaming and fallback, but really from your offer, including your offer. So you don't just let the end customer manage with that. Is part of your offer. That's, let's say, another approach that I think some companies are doing in the right way.
Okay, thank you. And I think if there has been a recurring theme so far, it's been touching on roaming and some of the challenges associated with roaming. So let's unpick roaming challenges a little. So what is the current status of NB-IoT roaming, and what are the hurdles and difficulties with NB-IoT roaming?
Well,
does anybody want to take that? I'm sure you all have a view on that.
I can start that one, but I mean, it's, as we already said, it's a question that is starting to get available. I mean, the billing systems within the operators, even the rates, the wholesale roaming rates, this is still an ongoing discussion. Besides, of course, all the technical aspects and the availability maybe of devices that can move freely between the different bands that are used in different countries. Today, it's let's say it's one by one. It's one battle at a day, and I guess that especially Ajay agrees with that, because we are in kind of similar business. It's one at a day. I mean, you announce an agreement, it works, you integrate, you test, and you jump to the next one. There will be an acceleration, but it's still today it's really on one by one. And then in some countries, I mean, maybe you don't have the technology, or you only have one carrier that supports the technology. That's also an important point that maybe some of my colleagues can comment further, but this will not be available everywhere, like, for example, 4G. There may be some countries where maybe the carriers there choose not to implement it. I don't know what my colleagues think.
Yeah, so what I'm seeing is basically this: some of the big operator groups, obviously between their opcos, they have enabled the roaming. And between other operator groups, they've also kind of struck deals. The GSMA is in the process of actually standardizing how to do the NB-IoT roaming. What we are seeing on the LTEM front, we're seeing a massive pickup. So we are seeing that actually moving along really well. There seems to be a lot more traction around that. And it's as with anything else, right? So when LTE first came out, that's what I always say. In the beginning, if you think about the entire issue with the number of bands and the number of devices and what could connect to what, you had all these different silos that were created. But in the span of about a year and a half, I mean, most of it was resolved. So I see this as well heading the right way. And so we are beginning to see some forward movement in this. One of the things that we should also think about is in terms of the entire rate structure, because that becomes important as well. As in, from an MNO point of view, if you are consuming, what is it, like 10 kbps on a device, you know, you're not going to be paying 10 kbps equivalent of 1 gigabyte worth of traffic, never. So the MNO has a particular ARPU that they have in mind, that they are expecting. And so the pricing plans that people are typically used to with respect to NB-IoT and LTEM, it's just a heads up, I believe is going to be changing across the board. And so, so that's something else as well that the MNOs are slowly waking up, as well how, and Fernando brought this up, which is how do they charge for this compared to just charging for just passage of data. And so the billing systems have to be updated. It's going to take some work, but we will get there.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Carry on.
I'll say I'm going to piggyback on that as well. I think the chief concern that I see is around commercials there. And I think the problem now that occurs is that MNOs now have an IoT solution that's not subsidized by their consumer and enterprise business, right? I mean, the reality is IoT has been riding on the back of networks that were already built for high ARPU devices there. It was just a extra for them to have IoT business making money on the solution that wasn't used. Nbiot is only for IoT, right? So now I think the challenge that MNOs have is they need to show a return on it. They have existing systems that aren't built for the billing component there. And the other piece, that traditional roaming greatly diminishes those returns. So I think the commercial model needs to change for NB-IoT so that it works out for all of the parties involved. And then you look at it, we mentioned this earlier, but from an enterprise perspective there, the coverage thing is the chief problem. You know, if the coverage isn't adequate, I can't deploy an NB-IoT only device. I had a customer recently that was well down the line of planning only NB-IoT coverage device when we met them, and they had to backtrack and say, okay, now I need to add CAT-M and LTE as a backup there. And if I do that, now they've completely blown their BOM budget and also had to go back and look at their battery budget. So.
Indeed.
Thank you. So, I mean, one of the things that's being mentioned there is the economics of effectively the wholesale rate and the interconnection between mobile operators. And I guess that the fundamental problem is that you know, wholesale rates tend to depend on a fee per traffic, and if you're specifically deploying NB-IoT, then there's specifically not a lot of traffic, because that's the point of it. So it doesn't become a particularly good mechanism for charging for those roaming connections. So how will the economic models change between carriers or within carrier groups, between carrier groups, and also between carriers and end users? What are the new commercial models going to look like?
Can I just bring some? Yeah. So some of the things that we are seeing, in fact, we are in the forefront of this right now, is between operators. Some of the things that we are seeing is exactly what you just brought up, Jim, which is you can't just bank on just usage because the rates are really low. So the equivalent of having minimum revenue. So think of it from an operator point of view. They have a particular ARPU to make. They are very interested in the number of active connections on their network. Some of them actually claim it as their own customers. And so with that in mind, they translate that to ARPU. And once you are above that particular ARPU level, then it could transform into the existing model. Okay, so that's typically what we're seeing, and unless you're willing to make the equivalence of commitments with the MNO in terms of how much money you're doing with them, something could change there. But so usually think of it as for extremely low data rates, expect a certain minimum you'd have to pay.
Yeah. So it becomes a charge per connection with data free versus the more established charge per data with the connection free.
Correct.
Right. Yeah. We are seeing the same, a similar situation when we discuss with the mobile operators. I mean, I think that this is going to come, whether we like it or not. This will be one of the best ways to monetize this kind of connections at both levels. I guess, between the operators and also between the MNOs and the end customers, which is, again, I think the market will get used to that. I mean, it's slow data, you pay that subscription, a certain amount of data is included. You can cope with that. It's not, then the billing system, that's another story. But for the audience, as far as the audience is concerned, because I think for them, it will be just some charges and that's it. And the data will be included. You pay a subscriptions to access the network. That's how we see it today.
I would agree. I think the pricing paradigm, when we look at getting charges based on the amount of data, that's what we all know. Many of us know. So we see things from that paradigm. And I think we all have to change that perspective and say, this is going to be the cost of the solution. Here's the value that this solution is bringing. Based on that value, here's the right cost. We disregard how much data is being used and look at the value of the solution and have costs based on that. And then we're not looking at like, well, if it's only 1 meg a year, that's a couple of pennies to an M&O and maybe a few more to each of us. So if we change that paradigm where now we're looking at the cost of a solution and kind of baseline that, so the M&O is making their return on the network infrastructure that they've invested in, and then we all have a solution for the enterprise customer and revenue for all of those who are in between.
Okay.
Let me maybe jump in here. I was a little bit quiet throughout the discussion because of a very specific reason. As you know, we're not the typical MVNO, since we have, let's say, a shareholder as an MNO, which brings us in a different position where we would say we would rather see ourselves among the MNOs rather than the MVNOs. And also then bringing me to another kind of paradigm that I would propose here, which is I wouldn't necessarily bring the burden of all the kind of wholesale and roaming discussions to the customer. The customer doesn't care. What they want, and we see this very often in discussions, they want to have a managed service of getting their connectivity at, of course, the best price. And that's basically the reason. Hence, this was one of the reasons what we started earlier 3 years ago with once really not bringing LPWA connectivity as the typical way as we are discussing it right here. And maybe there might be a paradigm shift. However, I think we need to think of something different and maybe need to be bold again. And this might be something where I'm not sure if as an MVNO or relying fully on roaming, this might be bring the longevity and the reliability that customers require for, but there is always a challenge. Hence, I think we need to somehow think together with the MNOs what the best will be and sit together with them on the table, and that's basically what we do.
Okay, thank you. So another thing that's come up is or several times is coverage, but on a slightly different scale. We're talking just network coverage here, and there was a comment made earlier. I think it was Curtis who said, if you want to roll out NB-IoT worldwide, you're in trouble. So is it necessary to combine all these technologies together into a single device? So you have NB-IoT, you have LTE-M, you have Cat1, and then you deploy your device and it works in a far wider range of circumstances. But on the flip side to that, by deploying all those technologies, you're increasing the cost of the device, you're reducing the battery life, and the expected battery life that you can rely on and plan on for your operations would come right down. And you're also potentially increasing the form factor of the device. So is there a market like that? Are we going to have to live with these multi-mode devices, or is this just a passing phase?
I would certainly hope that this is a passing phase and that business will find a way to provide a solution for customers. I think that's the driving factor there that makes business work in general. Customers need a solution that is global in nature. So I think it'll work out in time, but where we are today, I think you absolutely have to deploy a multi-mode device unless you know specifically where that device is going, which for the global customers that most of us work with and most of us are, that is a challenge that has to be considered, which means that you have things like battery life that may be a lot less than what you initially planned, and that goes into the business model on the enterprise side.
Maybe a thought on my side on this. I think to have a single SKU globally is still tricky, not just, let's say, from the technology side, but also from the device side as well, because I think the specific certifications and and all the stuff that needs to be done also on the hardware side. I think it's not easy as of today that you can use all the technologies in every area in the same way, because there are different bands, there are different kind of requirements and regulations here and there. So this might get tricky. Hence, I think it's important, of course, for us as connectivity providers to provide a whole bunch of services that allow you to go for the most flexible way. However, there's always still the kind of combination that customers need to go for, where they somewhat need to find out, okay, what is the best kind of hardware in conjunction with the connectivity part that really covers my needs and my areas that I want to be active in. So there is a kind of no one size fits all, but there could be good matches and with best coverage.
Okay. Thank you. If there are no other comments on that topic, I'll move on to a slightly different topic.
Yeah, just very quickly. One of the things we are seeing with the biggest modem manufacturers is actually a fallback modem. So they have LTM, Nbiot, and surprisingly 2G. So it definitely will increase the cost of the device, but I believe it's going to be a passing phase. This will all sort itself out.
Yeah, we have the same outcome from customers. When they want to go global, they need to cope with the BOM, with increasing in the BOM and the higher power consumption. Today, they don't have that much choice.
Okay, thank you for that. Moving on to a slightly different topic, coverage from a different perspective. What about private networks? When should private radio be chosen in preference to public networks, and what's the potential for LPWA in private networks?
That's great. Maybe I'll start off. I think the potential is massive. The number of conversations we're having on a daily, weekly basis is steadily growing. For us in regards to private networks. I mentioned this earlier in regards to CBRS opportunities in particular. I think that's changed the game here in the Americas, or in North America particularly. So we're seeing some great opportunities there. In terms of why would you choose a private over public network there or radio coverage there? The main thing, and I think this is something that's been happening for quite some time, is in-building coverage. So if you need coverage at your area, people have been putting in repeaters for a while. Now we get into, okay, I need that coverage, but also I need additional capacity. One of our customers, as an example, they have literally tens of thousands of devices that show up at a central location. And you can imagine the surge that you would get on a local tower if 5-10% of those needed to communicate at one time. And it's battery sensitive, so you don't want retries in place there. So they actually put a local core within that facility to meet those requirements for higher capacity and lower throughput. Or I should say lower latency. Okay,
does anybody else have any thoughts on potential
for us, most of the use cases, it is somehow in the healthcare part. This is where we have 2 or 3 projects ongoing, and also in certain utilities, oil fields, where you have really need for a private network. But again, the angle we have in this situation from a big perspective is to make sure there is a transition or a certain kind of roaming with the public networks. So, I mean, this is the role we play here. But in terms of needs, yeah, we see them mostly in certain utility applications and in healthcare.
Yeah, it's actually very similar for us as well. We've just been approached in healthcare, municipalities needing it. And it appears to be a market that has the potential of being really big. But we have to see.
And what are the applications within healthcare that are particularly big?
The use cases that we are seeing are around patients getting monitored inside a hospital where coverage is actually poor, and that same patient needs to be monitored with those devices once they leave the hospital as well. And so, there's a continuity between private to public from a connectivity point of view there.
Okay. Thank you. Other thoughts on key use cases for private LPWA? Anyone else? If not.
Yeah, I think some of the similar use cases we're seeing as well, shipyards, train depots, schools, with some of the challenges here with COVID, with local environments. I think municipalities are seeing some of those same challenges, needing to be able to provide a CBRS network, perhaps for workers or for utility solutions that are owned by the municipalities there. So a number of things like that.
Okay, thank you. So we're down to just about 5 minutes remaining, but I'm very conscious that LPWA isn't just 3GPP and Cellular, the Nbiot and the Ltem. There's a couple of other significant, at least one other significant player in the market. So you've got LoRa and the LoRa ecosystem, and you have Sigfox as well. How do all these technologies interwork? Are they completely separate? Will they get integrated into solutions alongside each other? Where does one have benefits over the others? And again, we've only got a few minutes, so quick answers, please.
Well, if I can say, I know especially one of them quite close, and there are use cases in which those technologies really make it better than any cellular. Those are easy to deploy, really low cost. So there are certain use cases, maybe for disposables that you mentioned at the beginning, Jim. I guess some of those technologies really can still make a difference compared with cellular. I guess both LoRa and Sigfox could do it in certain use cases better than cellular.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Yeah. Arne, do you have anyone?
Maybe, yeah. We see a lot of demand coming from the developer community that are very much using our services in conjunction with LoRa's connectivity or Sigfox. Because of the given nature, and I think, Fernando, you gave it a clue already that we can just confirm, it's very easy to deploy. And I think a lot of people that are just exploring the opportunities of IoT, they love it because it's so easy, and a lot of devices are all around. So they really like to use it in conjunction, basically, for instance, where you have some areas where there is no connectivity on a cellular basis or license spectrum-based connectivity, where you use or establish a private LoRa network quickly and easily, and then just use a gateway in an area where you, again, have connection. And so this allows you to really increase and enhance your IoT areas where you want to deploy something, which is, for instance, a use case I see is smart metering, and but also tank monitoring.
Yes, tank monitoring is an important one, particularly for LPWA. Any other thoughts on strengths and weaknesses? We're down to just a couple of minutes, so quick thoughts.
Yeah, I would just probably point out maybe the most obvious weakness for the other technologies, and I agree with my colleagues here. There certainly applications for them where they're a better fit, they're lower cost, quicker time to market. The radio spectrum, I think, is a key piece to what they offer as well. But I think the biggest challenge there is just the overall investment on the 3GPP LWA. You've got LPWA, you've got literally companies that are total of trillions of dollars behind them, where you have not quite the same level of investment on for LoRa and Sigfox. So I think that'll be the biggest challenge there, but I think long term there's a play for all of the solutions above to be in play and work together as well. I think we saw in the earlier part of this session where the gateway, the LoRa gateway was connected, backhauled by standard LTE.
Okay, any final thoughts before we have to draw this session to a close?
Nope.
Okay. In that case, I think it's time to say thank you very much to our panelists, Arne Assmann of Once, Ajay Joseph of iBasis, Curtis Govan of FlowLive, and Fernando Lobregat of Bix. So thank you very much for that. It is unfortunately impossible to do a round of applause over a virtual setting, but thank you guys anyway. And what I need to do is now hand over to the next session. So thank you very much for joining us. The IMC's IIoT conference will now move on to the next session, which is IIoT in the supply chain. The link to that track will appear on your screen at the conclusion of this section, which is imminent. And simply clicking on that link will allow you into the upcoming track. So once again, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Thank you all.